Hi there. Today we have a very, very interesting guest. I'm so thrilled to have this opportunity to chat with them again. It's someone that I've known for really, really, really long time. We work together, but most importantly, I've learned so much from them about emotions, about health, about well-being. So today we're welcoming Thor A Rain, non-medical pain and fatigue specialist, health activist, and the founder and creator of First Aid for Feelings. A concept, a course, a manual, a book. So Thor is someone who is really interesting person to chat with. They have their own experience with health and well-being and pain and recovery. And through their own challenges with health, they really realize that health underpins everything. They retrain to really be able to help others on their health journey. In this conversation, we obviously talk about health and well-being and learning more about ourselves, finding more about who we truly are without any of the societal, cultural, normative labels, and understanding how to find our own self-love, how to find our self-worth. And we also Thor opens about their transition, discovering that they're non-binary, that they are a trans man. And we openly talk about the things of being just yourself in a world that wants you to be one way, and you really need to take agenda, take ownership in your own hands and be just who you are.
Before we go any further, just like to remind you about our new patreon.com account. You can find us on Into Your Life podcast. This is a place where we share our gold nuggets. And if you're a regular listener, you'll know that we love our gold nuggets. So this will be a place where you can find your gold nuggets, all the extras, and conversations potentially between me and Lenka going down the line. We love this site, and we know that having you part of our community will just help us to grow the site and be a place for you to connect, to have your space, and to feel part of this wonderful community that we are building.
Hi, Thor. How are you? Please welcome.
Hi, Lanka. Thank you. Yes, so the Helpful Clinic is like the social enterprise that then is sort of delivering the first aid for feelings. So they're kind of together, if you like, as a heading. And yeah, I'm delighted to be here. I'm really curious to see how our conversation goes and kind of what we touch on, because I know, we've connected before and there are similarities and some interesting questions I have no doubt coming up in today's podcast.
Yeah, so I definitely have known Thor for a while. We've been on a journey together from back in the day in Cambridge, where Helpful Clinic as a social enterprise was just starting out, figuring out things, getting the word out there. So could you tell us a little bit about your journey, both with starting out the Helpful Clinic, but also with your journey to getting you to a point of actually wanting to start a social enterprise to help people with, the name suggests, helping people with their health and well-being and be helpful, but there's so much more to it.
Yeah, so let's start with the Helpful Clinic, and then we can go back in time, do a bit of time traveling. So absolutely. So you joined us. We did an impactathon in 2016. So the clinic launched end of 2015 as a social enterprise. And one of the ideas was to do an impactathon. So for those of you who don't know what an impactathon is, don't worry. There are very few of us who actually know what this means. But it's like a marathon, but instead of running, the focus is to have an impact. So we sent out a call asking people to help us sort of create the coursework or for the First Aid for Feelings workshop that we were doing at the time, but also help us with things like the website and marketing. And I've spent my focus and my training on kind of helping people. I know very little or knew very little, I know a little bit more now about marketing. And you were one of the people who answered the call. It was like an Eventbrite, let's see what happens. So we had like a 24-hour impactathon at the Future Business Centre in Cambridge. And it was a lot of fun. I remember, we had different teams, we had different things going on, and you helped set up all the kind of social media accounts and sort of really kind of introducing me to the idea of like keywords, which were like a novel idea for me at the time. And I think that's very much the sort of is the spirit of the Helpful Clinic, is coming together to make change happen. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to make it a social enterprise. So I've been working as a clinician since 2010, specializing in pain, fatigue, stress, and anxiety. And actually, as I was bringing this into more of a clinic status, I thought, actually, I want to make this a social enterprise. So there is a collaborative focus here, and that there's a sense of shared contribution to the mission. So social enterprise always has a mission. So as in, what's the purpose? So it's not just making money, it's actually having an impact. And for the Helpful Clinic, it is to increase health and well-being through increased health and emotional literacy, which is basically, if I put it kind of like, how do you read and respond to your feelings? And feelings being both emotions and sensations. So if you have pain, do you know how to identify what kind of pain, what action to take? If you have anger, do you know to identify what kind of anger you're feeling, what action to take to respond to it? And you may notice I speak about them as if they are the same thing. So all feelings are, all emotions are feelings, but not all feelings are emotions, if that makes sense. It's a bit like all vicars are priests, but not all priests are vicars, if I got it the right way around. So because in my mind, feelings, so emotions and sensations, so whether it's a physical pain or emotional something, they really are two sides of the same coin. So you really can't feel happy without having some physical sensations about it. And you can't have pain without having some emotions about it. So that really seeing it as the same thing. And when we know how to read that information from ourselves and then how to respond to it constructively, we are much more likely to be able to help ourselves feel better. So that's the kind of mission. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And then, well, why am I bothering to do that? Which I think is sort of like, why bother setting up a social enterprise? And, there's a lot of fear. I'm always at the edge of my knowledge base. There's always learning something new. And sometimes I'm really scared. I'm kind of teetering on the edge of my comfort zone going, oh, is this all right? But actually, I always come back to my why. Why do I do this? And I think for me, sort of there's a bigger moment to it, but actually the sort of crystallized moment of it is back in the early 2000s when I was severely ill. I had ME/CFS, I had fibromyalgia. I was also suffering from complex PTSD at the time without people really understanding that or having that. Didn't have that diagnosed at the time. Also, what wasn't known at the time is that I'm trans, I'm transmasculine, I'm non-gender, non-binary in my gender. So there was a lot of things going on in my early 30s. And I remember sitting there at some point in the early days when I was pretty much bedbound, and having this sort of blinding insight that even though I was quite sort of academically validated, it's like, I think me and myself and I and other people would agree that I'm quite clever. It's like, yes, okay, got that. I realized that I was absolutely illiterate when it came to my own health and feelings. And I tell you what, my ego was quite bruised. It was like, oh dear, it's like, how can I be so clever over here and then be absolutely ignorant about something so primal and so important? So I think that's where the real seed, that's always the seed I come back to. And funnily enough, to often work with people who, for all intents and purposes, would say that they're well educated, that they know how to function in the world in various ways. But actually, when it comes to this really primal bit about the self and the body, how the body works, how it interacts with our emotions and our thoughts, really not that well informed. So I went on a journey of educating myself. I recovered, trained up, and then set up the clinic. But that kind of really recognizing that health and emotional literacy and what's now more recently come into being, which is self-care literacy, is just off the radar. We've got it now in primary schools more. There's more focus on it. But for those of us kind of who are already grown-ups, we've got a lot of catching up to do. So that's kind of what gets me out of bed in the morning. And that's kind of the high level input on my journey.
Because it's so absolutely right that our health underpins everything. It's what I know that you say often, what you believe in, what you live by. It's if we're not healthy, then what is the point of having degrees and being very smart? And you're really touching on such an interesting and relevant point that there is so much of us in the world being driven by our minds, and there's so much validation put on our academical results, on our professional results, on what we can accomplish with our minds, with our rational, logical, intellectual minds. And there's not enough put on the heart, on the kindness, on the loving, and the knowing of the body. It's such a fascinating journey, and it's why I love this podcast, because this podcast has pushed me so far on understanding my body, my emotions, my inner workings, my hormones, all of those things in there. And I can't even imagine how is it then for someone who is in pain, who is chronic pain, chronic fatigue, bedbound. Like, these are quite severe cases, but we know that there's a lot more people like that struggling these days. And
Yeah.
the traditional medicine, no matter how much I love all the doctors, all the technology, all the science that we have managed to accomplish in the last, couple of years, decades, that they're still missing a point.
Well, I think the Western medicine is really solution oriented and is very single focused, very single minded. So it's often referred to as a silo system, like silos. And I had surgery a few years ago, and it was really, I fitted very neatly into a category, and I could have surgery and then I recovered, and it was just like, for all intents and purposes, like easy. But when I was ill, 25 whatever years ago, because the ME/CFS, fibromyalgia, are in the category of medically unexplained symptoms. So that's MUS is a proper category, which is basically doesn't fit into a silo. And so Western medicine really struggles with multisystemic conditions, with conditions that don't follow the usual trajectory. And if we think about anything usual is based on average statistics. Now, statistics are great for understanding trends, for understanding predictability, but no human is a statistic. So every human will be in their own way going through the experience of whatever it is that's going on. And I think we've now there's been a real vanguard. So I've been doing this, 15 plus years. There's a real vanguard. There's been, lifestyle medicine, functional medicine, integrated medicine. So we haven't quite landed on lingo yet, but there's from a number of different directions, there is a real shift. And one of the things that I'm really delighted to be a part of is I'm now a self-care champion for the Self-Care Forum. So there's a National Self-Care Week in the UK. There's also the International Self-Care Foundation, which is International Self-Care Day on 24th of July, because of course self-care is 24/7, like July 24th. And that we are now much more aware of that agency that we need to have of our own bodies, much more aware of that actually we have a responsibility to educate ourselves of our own, our own health, but also there is a systems change that's needed to help us both know that, and then also find, where do I educate myself, or how do I educate myself? Social media, although we are on social media, is a really tricky area, because there are people out there talking about some really dodgy stuff that has no scientific merit, giving some advice for which they have no qualifications or accreditation. There's no quality control. So I can feel that I've definitely got a bee in my bonnet about that. But also I'm very mindful that we consume a lot through social media, that we access knowledge through that platform or those channels. And so it's important to make this kind of information accessible and available. And I think we are shifting away from that kind of power dynamic with the doctor, with the white coat. Both that medics or healthcare professionals are becoming more human, and there's much more talk about, when mistakes are made. And there is some movement towards that kind of black box thinking of when that is done, we can learn from it rather than, blame people, unless there's obviously malice or negligence. But then also that kind of, how do we share that information? So like if you look at any self-care shelf in any bookshop now, there's loads of information. There's some good authors writing sort of accessible or making information accessible to us. So I think all of that is changing, but we're still waking up. And it's interesting, millennials, so Gen Z, I'm 53, so definitely born last century. People born this century, there is more awareness of that kind of what language to use, that this matters, and that wellness holidays are now much more of a trend. People are going on a wellness pilgrimage. There's much more awareness of it, even just down to, I was writing in a blog the other day, even just in terms of alcohol consumption, is much less with Gen Z than it is with, our generations. I mean, I know you're younger than me, but so I think there are some really great things happening, but also there is that kind of the dark side of the web. There is also that we need to be more vigilant that that information is sort of appropriate and accurate. So I think there's been a fundamental shift, a tectonic shift. I don't think we're quite at the watershed yet. I think we're still building up that momentum, but I imagine give it another 5 years and we will have we've come over that tipping point where more of us understand that health is, what's called biopsychosocial, so biology, psychology, and social context. And there will be some laggards. There'll be those behind them. No, it's all separate. But my sense is that we are really, coming up to that cusp of that change.
I think everything goes in a bell curve, so we can always look at the situation and position ourselves in a bell curve. And you're right, because as my generation, millennials and the younger, I can definitely see the shift. And I was impressed with how many people are not smoking, not drinking, careful about their sleep, careful about their coffee consumption. And obviously the boom of podcasts and books and resources are really accessible to the general public, and there is a huge demand, a desire for people to step in and take ownership. And yet I do see that it can be potentially cultural or nationality and economy dependent, because
Absolutely.
seeing lots of this happening in the UK, in the US, obviously in Northern America, but also seeing here in the Czech Republic that the younger generation who travels, yes, the older generation or the generation, no matter the age, but who doesn't travel, who live the more traditional life, who doesn't necessarily speak fluently English, who doesn't have this kind of a worldly mind, it's
Yeah.
still on the other end where they're still just going to the doctors depending on their opinions. They allow the doctors to dismiss them because, as you said, it's in silos. I have
Yeah.
this issue with my mom. Every time she goes to doctors, she's just over 60 and they're like, well, you're old, that's it,
Yes.
why would we deal with anything? Why would we look at something complexly? Why would we try to resolve your issues? Here are more pills and just, accept the fact that you're old. Goodbye.
Yes. And that is so, I mean, I'm so sorry to hear that for starters, because it's such a symptom of a systemic culture, which is so disempowering, I think, for both the medic and your mum. And it's really, that kind of, I was like heartbreaking to feel that, yes, it is definitely still going on. And it's just why it's so important to learn advocacy, self-advocacy, health advocacy. And that, first of all, that you have the right to speak up, and that you have the right to ask for information, and you have the right to request certain investigations. But if you don't know that you have those rights, or you don't know the questions to ask, you're kind of stumped. And I mean, so many of my consults, even just like this morning, a consultation, part of it was preparing the person I'm supporting for a medical appointment on Friday. Things to ask, make sure that she says this up front, so she can then assess, does the person she's speaking to actually specialize in what she's dealing with? Because it's possible that she'll be met with a first person that doesn't really know how to respond to those complex needs. And that kind of knowing that you can advocate for yourself is such an important thing. But not then it's like, well, I'm always like, well, that's great, but then how do I do it? How do I take it from the good idea to the practical? And I think that this is part of why we do our outreach and our blogs and trainings and everything. And the beauty is that it's not just us. I can really feel there's more of us in this space. And I'd like to think that kind of every action matters. So even though it may feel insurmountable and that we're still sort of coming up against a really old, sort of embedded, ingrained mindset that's really quite dismissive, the inroads I've seen over the last 10, 15 years do give me hope, although of course I'd wish we were a bit further along the way.
And I think one big part of what you do is the empowering people. It's the empowering people to speak up, the empowering people to really see their self-worth, that they're worthy of self-care, that they're worthy of being taken seriously. And yes, part of it is absolutely helping them navigate the medical system and understand medical system. But so much of what you do is then empowering people, teaching people, helping people to take a better care of themselves, to understand themselves better with your courses, with your books, with your consultations. Everything that you do really helps people then, okay, yes, I definitely might need a doctor and really put myself out there a bit more there, but there's so much we can do ourselves. So could we look more on this side of then what it is that you actually do in terms of empowering people to help themselves, and specifically if we can look at what is the first aid kit for feelings, because I know that that plays a big part in what you do.
Right. So we've done the high level, kind of helping you understand the experiences you're having, and then to read them, like literacy, and then how to respond to them. So a lot of what I do is in the early I do one-to-one consultations. There's a course on Insight Timer about first aid for feelings, and lots of free meditations on Insight Timer as well, which is a meditation app if you're not familiar with that. And then there's the first aid for feelings manual. And then there are, the blogs and the videos that we do if you come onto the website. So, and then events like on the 24th of July this year, we had a panel discussion. So me with 4 other specialists, we were talking about self-care from the perspective of trauma, from relationships, from embodiment, and one was speaking from the sort of neurodivergent perspective as well. So we do these kind of events to spotlight certain days or weeks, sort of awarenesses, but also that kind of always has that educational component. So I work on kind of 3 different levels. One is literally knowledge transfer. It's like, okay, the most important system in your body that I work with would be what's called the HPA axis, the hypothalamus adrenal pituitary gland axis. So that's basically the system that kicks in anytime your fear response, the fight, flight, or freeze response kicks in, because that's the system that sort of regulates the stress hormones in the body. If your body's in a state of stress, it can't do any maintenance, it can't do any healing. It's busy kind of like surviving the next 3 minutes. So always what we're working towards is getting your body and you more and more in a state of healing, more and more into maintenance, reduce those stress hormones. And when you understand how this system works, how to identify when it's active, how to help you shift out of it or bring it down, that's very much like a knowledge transfer that I'm doing a lot of the time, and help people identify what works for them, because it might show up differently for people. For one person, it may show up mostly in digestive symptoms. For another person, it might show mostly up in migraines, or it'll be different, maybe the way it presents to you, but also what you then need to care for it may be individual to yourself as well. So that kind of getting curious about you, getting curious, okay, what's going on for you? And then we'll do some experiments. Right. If you do this and this intervention, or try this and this protocol, how does that work? We gather our results. What worked well, what didn't work so well, what do we tweak? So that's the kind of taking the knowledge, applying it to you personally and making it practical. Then the third thing is really pattern spotting. It's recognizing what patterns show up and which patterns suit you and which patterns don't suit you. So I think a classic one is being respectful of your rhythm, your pattern. So some people that I work with really try very hard to wake up at 6 o'clock and be all morning people, because apparently that's good. But I'll tell you what, so many people I work with, no, they are much better suited, to waking up between 8 and 9, starting the working day maybe at 10, and working until about 7 or 8 in the evening, or for some, they need to take a break in the middle of the day, and so they work in the mornings and the afternoons. So we really get curious about kind of what's your rhythm, what's your patterning, and then we support that. What could, in terms of negotiating with others. So one of the, so when people are, sorry, I'm just going backwards here. So sometimes I work with people sort of ad hoc, so just step by step, which is rare though for the first engagement, but does happen sometimes. Mostly people do what's called a journey. So we start on a journey together. We do a stage together. It's 9 consultations. There's a journey guide. Like you see the folder up here, 120-page journey guide where we work through. And so we start with really getting a sense of where are you now? So we look at what's on the biology, psychology, and social context. We do a bit of a map of where you are now, and then that kind of education about the different systems in the body. And then we look at what's holding you here, what's stopping you from progressing. And that might be behavioral, or behaviors that you've either adopted in response to being ill or behaviors that you've learned. There might be genetic stuff going on. There might be traumas. There might be beliefs. There might be diet-related things. So your nutrition is really unhelpful. It may be that you're avoiding going to the doctor, so you're not getting the medication you need to help what you're doing. Or it might be that you're over-medicating. So I remember working with this one guy, came in with digestive symptoms. And when we checked him with medication, he said he'd been taking paracetamol 3 times a day for the last 3 years. And I was like, okay. And of course, my question is always, is it helpful? My favorite question. And he took a moment to think about it. And then he actually thought, I don't think it makes any difference, which was really interesting. So he'd been told to take this. He was still doing it 3 years later. And actually, when we Sherlocked it, we got more curious about it. Not only did it not help him, it was making things worse, because actually, although paracetamol is very low in terms of friction for the body, sustained use over that amount of time, definitely not helpful. So, and I think, and I'm looking at, am I using sort of products like medicine in a rational way? Is it proportionate? Is it helpful? And then, of course, activity levels. Are you in boom and bust? Are you kind of, when you finally get a little bit of energy, you use all of it rather than banking something for the immune system or, your detox system to use. So that's nutrition, symptoms, mood, work with thoughts and mood in general, activities, which is the boom and bust, or barrier behavior. I sometimes see people who've been ill for a while, they have these barriers. So they don't even check if whatever boundaries they had before are still relevant. So they're living in a very small sort of comfort zone, not recognizing actually they have recovered more than they realize, and they can go a bit more and, check out that, and build up the capacity. And then, of course, a key aspect here is relationships. The relationships you're in, are they healthy? Are they toxic? Are you able to communicate what you need? Are you able to say yes or no in the way that's most helpful to you? And interestingly, within the relationships section of the work is also where I put healthcare professionals, or I put, work colleagues or managers or employees, any kind of relationships that we look at through that lens of relationships. And when we look at all these 6 areas together, actually, we get a really solid, strong way of, okay, it's like destinations on a map. We don't always do them in a linear way, but we go through all of these and actually to get you to a point of, yes, feeling better, often recovery, but not always. Sometimes it's about having that really tough conversation, like this is the max of your capacity as we understand it now. And then how do I make peace with the fact that I may be not as healthy as I'd like to be? And how can I still have a good quality of life, even though I may have some physical or emotional or mental limitations that I need to be mindful of? So I think that's also that kind of, so it goes, like somebody said, it goes from the profound to the practical, because, we can go into profound spiritual, beliefs, your relationship with your faith, or relationship with higher power, to very practical, like, okay, I need to work out my menu for the week, and then that minimizes waste. Like I work with somebody on minimizing waste. She lives on her own, so shopping and cooking for one is a complex thing. So we spend a few consultations really just working on that detail, getting very practical and giving full permission for that. So I think that kind of sort of encapsulate the sort of the different levels. So it's that kind of knowledge transfer. It's about getting practical, and then about really getting curious about you and what are your patterns and what works for you and what doesn't work for you.
That's a lot. That's a lot. But it's as you said, it is very much a journey, and a journey isn't, or sometimes just quick. Sometimes a journey can be a while, especially when you relearning or putting new habits or routines into your life, or like you said, learning about different ways of doing things, or how to not waste. Like you said, if you're cooking for one, it's not always easy, so how do you minimize waste? And it's just finding different ways to to live in a better way as well, is looking after yourself.
Sorry, just to build on that, because so I think the fastest I worked with anybody, was 9 months, so I think, there's this, and then for some it takes longer. And that's also one of the reasons why I developed first aid for feelings. So just, coming to that, because I remember when I was myself ill, it was all kind of medium long-term stuff. And in this moment, I was feeling, terrible. So, so actually knowing, okay, how do I help now when I know that what I'm also doing is working towards recovery improvement over a period of time? And I think for me, that was the real brainwave when I learned about how the brain works. And I learned that when my brain is I am in a very adrenalized state, I have now got access to the part of my brain that can be strategic, that can think in solutions, that know what worked last time. So actually starting to put that together into a first aid kit, like we have a first aid kit with plasters and paracetamols. For me, when I was ill, I created a first aid kit with like when I'm angry, when I'm anxious, when I'm in pain, when medication isn't the response, or, so, and then from there on, I build okay, well, emergency medicine has got airways, breathing, and circulation, the ABC, sort of mnemonic. So let's make that into something. So it's like, okay, awareness, breath, body, and choice. So that kind of really getting creative about how to help myself recover. And then when I started working with people, I realized I was using this stuff all the time. So which is when it kind of went into a workshop and now a manual. But I think it is that kind of sometimes when we're doing work with ourselves, whether it's across all three dimensions, so physical, mental, and social, or whether it's more physical or one of the others, it rarely is a short-term gig. It normally takes at least a wee while, if not quite a while. And so knowing that we can have things in the moment that help us now, I think matters, certainly with somebody as impatient as me, it was really important to know that I had something that I could reach for in this moment and that would ease whatever intensity I was feeling.
And it comes back to, educating oneself and being more aware. And you speak about emotions, and we are not taught to learn about our emotions. It's as a child, as we stop daydreaming, stop sulking. Oh, babies don't, boys don't cry, or stop being a baby. Oh, that doesn't hurt. Just man up. All these phrases that we hear, and we learn to not know our emotions, and quite often is, oh, you stop being so depressed. But it might not be depression. It could just be a sadness. It could be grief. It could be anger. It could be anything. And it just, oh, well, stop being depressed. Or, don't be sad. What have you got to be sad about? There's people worse off than you. And there's just all these glib sayings that we've most probably heard, that we don't know or understand our emotions. So when we're feeling something, we don't know what it is that we are feeling.
Yeah.
And if it's too uncomfortable for ourselves or for those around us, we suppress them, which can then also start to manifest into physical ailments and into making us ill or stressed, and then into the mental health. So emotions are so important, because we as a society don't know our emotions. We don't understand what we're feeling.
Yeah.
And why would we react to something, whereas maybe in a week's time we wouldn't react to that because of the emotion or where we at with our feelings or our mind or something. And it's learning, educating ourselves about ourselves, which sounds really weird, but over I'd say about 150 years, there's been this separation of self from physical. So we might know, yes, burnt my finger, okay, put something on it. But so we're more aware of our physical stuff, but not where it's coming from, or the emotion behind it, or what's caused it, which could also be something else. So it's really great. What you're doing is providing a place where people can come and learn about themselves, and how can they create their own first aid box, or how can they learn about how they're feeling. And this is something I know earlier you and Lenka were speaking about, cultural and the way it is. that's something I've realized. I grew up in South Africa, and
Yeah.
it's very much you are responsible for yourself. You go to a doctor or any type of doctor you wanted, you weren't limited. You could go to what we call sangomas or witch doctors, or you can go to your regular GP, or you could go to a Buddhist doctor, or you could go to the Chinese doctors. You could go have acupuncture, herbs, you name it. You just found it, because there was this culture of, okay, I don't feel right, I'm not sure what to do, so I will research what to do
Mm.
and find out for myself. So it's almost take responsibility for yourself. And when I came to the UK, that was gone.
Mm.
I have had a lot of arguments with a lot of GPs and actually been kicked out of a couple, because it was very much, but I'm the doctor, I know what's best. Yeah,
Mm.
but it's my body. I know what's best. No, I'm sorry, you can't be a patient here anymore. It's like, are you kidding me? So
Yeah.
it does. It can be quite a battle. And I love how you said in the beginning, you helping somebody to know what questions to ask when she goes to her appointment. And
Yeah.
I think that's so important, because it comes down to, okay, I'm getting this, I'm the doctor, I know best. And you're like thinking, oh, I don't want to be kicked out of the surgery, or I don't want to have this battle. So, okay, I'll just do whatever you say, even though it doesn't feel right. Because looking for alternatives is not always accessible. It's becoming better. As you said,
Yes.
it's becoming better,
Definitely.
but it's
Yeah.
not there yet.
No.
But it's people like you who are starting to provide the places, provide something, and hopefully more and more. And I am seeing more and more. And
Mm.
I am, but I think it is that cultural thing. It's okay, that's how I've grown up. Now, how do I change it? I mean, my husband is older than me, and it was only about 2 years ago that I got him to like, actually, you're responsible for your own health.
Mm.
Try something different,
Mm.
And I did catch him at a weak moment. I'll put my hand up to that. He was really ill. He was very weak at that time, but he realized what I had been talking about all this time. And luckily, he has been very healthy. But it does. It almost, you need to be at a bad place in order to shift. Was why wait to that? Why
Yes.
not do it when you well, or in a place? It's like, okay, what can I put into place for when I'm sad, or how can I learn about my emotions? And I love that you are bringing this all about. And one of the things that I'd love you to share, if possible, is we always teach what we need to learn.
Yes.
Can you share a little bit about your journey to from, because I know you're not from Wales. I know that you're not born in the UK.
Yes.
So can you share a bit of that journey? Because something would have got you in that place in the early 2000s when you were so ill.
Yeah.
And so you hit your rock bottom
Yes.
and then started picking up. Can you please share that just for our listeners who are maybe seeing somebody who is on that downward spiral, or they might be at rock bottom, and just for them to have that hope or that guide saying, well, they did it, so I can do it. So would that be something you'd be willing to do?
So let me see if I've got your question right. So it's about what can I identify that got me to that rock bottom? Yeah.
Yes, just a little bit about your journey to that,
Yeah.
because we've heard of you being at rock bottom and coming
Yeah.
up, but what got you to rock bottom? Because sometimes listeners, or we just need to hear that and think, oh, actually, I'm
Yeah.
on that downward spiral, or that's where I'm at.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and thank you for bringing in and sharing from your cultural context, because I think it is so important that we learn from each other. And for those of us who have come from one culture and then are living in another culture, I do think we have kind of a very interesting perspective, particularly like I've been here now since last century. I came in 1999, so I've been here a wee while, I'm kind of half British really. but that kind of being able to see something so closely from the inside, yet from that outsider perspective. And interestingly, I do think my gender being non-binary is a very interesting one as well, because I was assigned female at birth and I present now as masculine. So I have walked in this world perceived as both female and male. And it's so, but being non-binary, being from that kind of third space gives me a very unique, and those people like me, gives us a very unique space into the gendered aspects as well, because I think gender is also a really important part of health and how different genders have kind of different main issues when it comes to health. So just to kind of place that here as well, because I certainly see the people that I work with, women or men, for example, that they are sometimes struggling with something that is a gendered experience. And I think this is sort of, it sort of ties in a little bit with Jung's kind of collective unconscious, but the way I talk about sort of my understanding of an aspect of that is I refer to it as culturality. So if you think about a Venn diagram, the overlap, one is culture, the other one is personality, and the intersection or the overlap is your culturality. So when I came to the UK in 99, I didn't think I was that Icelandic at all, really. Sure, you know, that's where I was born. I grew up for most of my life up to that point, but you know, surely not that Icelandic. I didn't feel a lot of affinity with my fellow Icelanders. But I hadn't been here long when I realized there were some really Icelandic aspects to my experience. One of which was being risk-seeking. So it was like kind of Viking mentality, you know, always looking at what's over the horizon. You know, at that point, we hadn't crashed the economy in 2008. That was yet to come, but that's a really good example of just how risk seeking or not risk averse we are. Iceland is a very small culture. It's about 350,000 people, give or take. So that sense of social responsibility, but also that sense of kind of freedom and authority is all, I mean, it might be somebody's second cousin. You know, it's like authority is like maybe not that holy. So like coming to the UK, that was a lot of like, oh, wow, okay, no, hierarchy really matters. And don't you dare challenge authority. Don't talk about sex. You know, and just walking up to somebody and saying hello was like, oh, okay then. So those kind of social aspects that I really saw from the outside as an Icelandic person, and then I could refer back to sort of my culture of origin. And I think where that ties in with my personal journey, that kind of how those beliefs or that kind of cultural training that I inherited, you know, just like the DNA I inherited, was very much kind of very outwardly focused, very focused out towards the next horizon. So I didn't have a lot of awareness of me or my feelings or my choices, or even the fact that I had choices. You know, I think I spend a lot of my time just reacting to what came up in my environment, what came up in my day. And I think one of the sort of really interesting things that when I look back now, I'm like, really, you didn't see that coming, was I really didn't think I was ever afraid. So obviously fear is not something that's highly valued in Viking society, in Icelandic culture. Fear is not one of the highest value. Neither is calm, by the way, which is a high value here in the UK. So being afraid is certainly not something that you talk about. And it was certainly something that I was so suppressed, I didn't even have a sense of what that might feel like. And I can see now, because at that point I didn't know, I couldn't remember some of the childhood traumas that I experienced because they were so severe. They went into repression. That actually that kind of suppressing everything related to fear made that I was always up for driving my body beyond anything it had in the tank. And I would just fuel it with coffee and sugar. And I mean, no joke, I actually remember having like a bag of M&Ms for dinner because I thought they had nuts in it. Sure, I thought that was a decent dinner choice. I mean, I come from a family where my mother was so kind of dedicated to the women's liberation movement that she didn't really go into the kitchen, so which is great from her perspective, and that's another sign of the times that when I was a child and she was a young mother, that was the sort of the cultural vibe at the time. And so I think there's a whole generation of kids, or my age in Iceland, where food wasn't really a big thing, or that kind of baking or cooking or those kind of women's things at that time were really rejected. But anyway, I digress slightly. So, but that kind of not really respecting the body, and that there was always that sense of going for the challenge. And even to the point where I was kind of counterphobic. I don't know if you've heard that term, counterphobic. So when you're phobic, you're afraid of something. When you're counterphobic, you go against everything you're afraid of. So I was doing, target practice with rifles and things, and I was motorbiking all over the place and whatever. If anybody said, "Oh, you're afraid to do this," I'd be like, "No, no, no, I'm not afraid." Duh. And the lack of self-awareness was such that I had no sense of fear. But it was like press my button and I would respond like in a split second. So I think that kind of not being even aware of something as basic as fear was a sign. Also, like, I never got angry. It's like, really? So at that time, if somebody had said, "I think there might be something going on with the fact that you never feel fear and anger," I would have been, because I'm so intellectually curious, I would have been like, "Oh, that's interesting. Yes, tell me more." And I might possibly have gotten there a bit quicker than I actually did. But I think it's like when we don't feel certain things, like fear and anger are really basic primal feelings. And as far as I can tell, all humans, whether they're aware of it or not, will feel them. The other aspect was pain and fatigue. So pain and fatigue not celebrated in my culture. It's a bit like the Brits, unless the arm's falling off and, you lost both your legs, Jeff, was it this sketch by Saunders and can't remember them now. But anyway, there's a British sketch where two comedians they've basically lost all their limbs, but they're still going. So that's very much a cultural sort of belief that kind of water that we swim in that we don't even see is somewhat doolally. So when I come into adulthood, I go working in films. I'm working in films, which is all kind of about bravado, on set, lots of alcohol. Although I rarely drank because I was so afraid of losing control. So I was over the driver. But working ridiculous hours. And then when I came to the UK, I worked in the city, which again was all ridiculous hours and all bravado and rah-rah testosterone, on steroids. And that kind of sense of actually the thinking that was a good idea. And I always remember the time that when I decided that I was going to stop working in the city. There was two reasons. One was I'd recently sort of really smashed my head on the glass ceiling. I remember at this point I'm presenting as female. I mean, I haven't changed, just my presentation has changed. And I realized that a guy that had been recruited at the same time as me was earning 10K more than I was for no other reason than gender. And I was just like, oh, I'm not happy about that. But then I'd been I was a project manager, I'd been doing some presentation in the city with the stock exchange. And there'd been liquid lunch. This is back in the days of the liquid lunch. And on the train home to Cambridge, I realized that I'd run a whole bottle of white wine for lunch. I'd then gone and presented at this meeting at the London Stock Exchange, and I hadn't made one mistake. I was flawless. And on the way on the train, I was like, there's something fundamentally wrong here. If I can function to that level with no food in my belly, just alcohol, surely this is not a good idea. So I was like, okay, so I decided to, leave my job, go back to uni. But within 6 months, I was ill. I think, the system had been whacked so, it's like the string on a bow had gone so far that even though somewhere I'd realized maybe the way I'm living my life is not a good idea. There was, it'd gone too far. And then actually it just, there was that multi-systemic breakdown. It was a viral infection, but that I didn't recover from. So I think that the way the Icelandic culture influenced my kind of personality aspects, which is, curious. I'm always like, oh, what's over there? Oh, new shiny thing, So, and I've had to really work with that and actually stay more present and go deeper with things and not get distracted so easily. So that personality trait, coupled with, childhood traumas that I wasn't aware of, that has shut down a lot of my feelings, the celebration of courage and that kind of rah rah and ignoring your body all came together to this point. Oh yeah, and food was kind of like just fuel, really. That, oh, by the way, and sleep is for the dead, and that all of those beliefs really got me to the point where yeah, I was so severely ill. And I remember another sort of, we all have these moments. And I think it actually can be interesting to, when we sit down and actually mark out those pivotal moments in our lives and create a bit of a pearl, I think a pearl necklace, of these different pivotal moments of what's the story that we tell ourselves and we tell others about our experience. And the kind of next pearl in my necklace is that kind of, I had an appointment with a GP who told me I would never recover, that the sooner I would get myself certified or registered as disabled, I'd be eligible for all sorts of, construction work on the house where I was living in, because I needed disability aids at the time. And, and I think genuinely she was coming from a good place. I think she didn't do it very skillfully, and I think she had a very narrow-minded view of what was going on for me. But I think her compassion was very clear, and she sat me down for a really serious conversation. And I went home and I cried myself to sleep, woke up 10 hours later or 12 hours later, whatever, going like, there's got to be a way. And then that's where, starting to look at, okay, I need to take responsibility for what I'm bringing to the situation. I need to educate myself. Clearly, I don't know diddly squat about health stuff. I know a lot about disaster recovery strategies for computers, but is that helpful to my health? Maybe not. So that kind of, when you say to like about your husband, I think my third favorite question, Lenka will know this. So my first favorite question is it helpful? My second favorite question is, what am I making it mean? My third favorite question is, why bother? And I think if we haven't got a strong enough why bother, we don't bother, which is why when we have those experiences, and they often talk about as breakdowns. I like to think of them as breakthroughs. And that's something I haven't made that up. I picked up from somebody else, that actually when we break through some of the illusions, like the illusion of myself as this strong, sturdy Viking, rah, rah, climb a mountain before lunch, that breakthrough, painful as it was, both physically, but also to my ego. I have a reasonably sized ego. Some of that stuff I wasn't particularly happy about looking at, but actually the breakthrough is so important and can be so profound, because in a way that's when we're at our weakest or lowest, but actually that is the real point when we come off autopilot and actually we can get in the driver's seat and actually do some manual driving.
And that some of what you were saying sort of resonated with me, again, having come from a different culture. And I mean, Lenka's lived in the UK, and I'm sure she also noticed differences between the Czech Republic and the UK, but having grown up in a different culture, and then you come to the UK and I never thought of myself as South African until I sort of got to the UK and realized there was the South Africanness that does come out. And thank you for sharing that. Is the rah and the Vikings, and I think there's a little bit of the Viking culture in the Brits, as you said. Keep your chin up, keep going, even though your arm is coming off. Just pass A&E, they'll put plaster on, off you go. It I guess it comes back from the Norse who came and did some conquering, and then the Romans, and
there is that
and
bit,
all
yes,
that.
yeah.
So there is a bit of that rah in the UK, and I think it is very much the stiff upper lip. That's it, the stiff upper lip, and don't show your emotions, and just have this facade that everything is good, everything is hunky-dory, and that is something that we can really brings out. Again, we talked about the emotions and learning about who we are. So you were explaining then that you had this realization that you could present on a bottle of wine. It sounds amazing, but it's not amazing. I mean, it just shows how much adrenaline was almost coursing through you, that the alcohol didn't affect you to a point where
Yeah,
you
but I think
can do
also
a
that I've become
presentation.
so used to liquid lunches that was actually a normal thing. I think it was even like a Tuesday, or it's just like that's just. And I think I like what I like about that example is that oh yeah, that's really great, but no, that's wrong for all so many different reasons. So it was something that was culture. My colleague was like so impressed with me. He's like, oh, and I was like, that's completely the wrong thing. This he should have been really concerned for me, going like, hang on, let's just sit down, let's talk about this. This is not okay. Instead, I got all these kudos. My ego is just like stroked, like, yes, no. And I think that's the really important bit here, something that's culturally highly valued. So toxic, so unhealthy.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it was seen as, wow, you're amazing, for something that is actually can be very dangerous, because people
Yeah.
drive on on this because I think I can function. I gave a talk with no mistakes, so I can function. There's the danger in that. There's the health implication. It has a massive knock-on effect, but the culture is like, wow, as you
Yeah.
said, it's like,
Yeah.
wow, you're amazing.
Mhm.
So you've now you've realized that, as you said, the doctor, through compassion, but was almost saying, just accept this.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, look, what can we do to help you come through this? It's like, well, this is the way you're going to be. So
Mhm.
let's see how we can carry on you being this way, because there was
Yeah.
no encouragement for you to improve. There was no, okay, let me see what your lifestyle's like. Let's see. There was that offer of, okay, you like this, so let's keep you in that silo or in that box. So we will provide you with a physical box. Let's fix your house so you can stay that way. And
Yeah.
you realizing, no, this is not the way forward, and doing your own research and using your brain to
Mhm.
find ways. But you've also mentioned that you've transitioned.
Yeah.
What got you there? Because this has all been very much dealing with your childhood trauma, dealing with crazy jobs by the sound
Mhm.
of it, and this a lot of adrenaline driven stuff, this not having fear in, I guess, in not so much embracing your fear, but just being the Viking
Mhm.
that your culture is. But it's quite a big step to go from that then to actually transitioning and to finding that as part of your journey. Can you share a little bit about what that was like, and what got you there? Because it's not something that would be very common. It's not a way everybody would go. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So can you share a little bit about what sort of got you onto that path? Because obviously that's created a whole different journey for you.
Well, for me, it still is the same journey. So I think I'd like to sort of come back to Socrates, one of the Greek dudes, which is know thyself. And I think that kind of the morning after the GP appointment, um, that kind of recognition, I know diddly squat about my health or health in general, or nutrition or any other stuff. And actually, how well do I know myself? And so my sense is that from this time it's been a continuous journey of self-discovery. And certainly in my youth and my sort of early adult years, um gender stuff wasn't, that nobody questioned that. We were all indoctrinated with there's two parts, you're this or that. That's it. I mean, the fact that I was queer in sexuality was a bit of like, okay, I'm clearly not as boxed as whatever. And I got a lot of flack for that, particularly back home in Iceland, because again, I wasn't either or. I wasn't either gay or straight. And both factions had problems with that. And particularly from the gay community, I got a lot of aggression that or people taking me to one side, going, "You just to be brave, just got to be brave and take the final step." I was like, "Well, there is no final step. This is the step." Um, so I think for me that kind of increased self-discovery and self sort of knowledge. So as I work through the complex PTSD, as I cleared those childhood traumas, as I recovered, as I got more of a sense of, well, actually, who am I? What makes me tick? What kind of rhythm do I have in terms of, so I wake up at 5 or 6 in the morning. I'm like, ding, like Tigger, exactly, so, and I'm like, well, that makes me happy. So let's do that. And, what kind of work environment do I want to be in? What makes my heart sing? And then as I work through the various aspects, I was like, the gender thing, there's something going on there. And as I got more curious, I was like, well, I'm not a trans man, clearly not a woman, so it took a while for me to kind of get a sense of, and for a while I thought I was neither nor, which was a real bummer for my mental state, because when you're neither nor anything, that's not a really good place. So I remember the insight when I realized I was both, and that was a real light bulb. Oh yes, that makes much more sense and actually represents my experience a lot better. And then gradually, so I did this sort of social transition, coming out in terms of my non-binary gender, then, changing my pronouns, changing my name. And then as I sort of worked through that, but it was like in the legal aspect. And then actually, well, there is a remaining need here, which is the medical transition. So, and that was, again, it was a logical next step in this journey to be more and more of who I am, to be more and more true to who, that authentic self that is completely got devalued as an adjective, I think. But so in that respect, I think my journey is all our journeys. It's just that for me, it involves gender. For you, it might involve something else, And I think, sure, it takes courage. And I've certainly had aggression towards me because of my gender, and I've had inappropriate behaviors, and certainly in today's context, when my gender is, a political football, it certainly makes it difficult for me. And I use my first aid for feelings regularly to help me with those experiences. But at the heart of it, my sense, we're all on a journey to be more and more of who we are. And in a way, my aspiration for myself and for you and everybody is that when we come to kind of pop our clocks, like they say in the UK, when we, a moment before death, that we can have that feeling, I am truly who I am. And I can breathe and be with that. And that there is a sense of presence, that there isn't a sense of regret. That for me is universal. But yeah, one of my characteristics, which is the gender thing, is less common. And that's okay. Most of the time, I'm definitely not enlightened yet. There are times when I struggle with my gender. There's the times when I find it really hard to function in a society that is designed for two genders. It can make me feel excluded a lot of the time. So I have to be very gentle and mindful with that. And also find people who will resonate or relate to my experience. So finding allies and finding sort of that sense of belonging is real nourishment for me, and part of my first aid for feelings. To, when I live in the world with an aspect of myself that is not cared for by my society, that isn't responded to well by some people, beautifully by others, by the way, absolutely. So, but that kind of recognizing that many of us have that experience, it just may not be about gender.
And I guess this is where, as you said, your first aid box really comes into play, is understanding your emotions, especially as you said, you are in the arena of the political football, because of the journey that you've been on and the transitions that you've done. You are, at the moment, this is the way the political world is, and you are, as you said, the football. And I guess
aspect of my identity, yes.
But I guess this is where what you've learned since that doctor's appointment and the work that you do is so helpful to yourself, is understanding how you can, or finding ways how you can live in a society that is predominantly two genders, but also that you are neither or finding your own way, which is something different, is when you know yourself. You most probably find it easier or better, not necessarily easier, but know what you can and can't do. but also being able then to connect with the right people, to connect with the right, have those right relationships, because as you said, one of them is the relationships.
Absolutely.
And I'm assuming, because I haven't been on that journey, is that your relationships, or some of them, have most probably taken a sharp turn. Some of them have most probably fallen off a cliff face.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that then there comes this trust, or this being open with new people. To, do you trust them to honor who you are, or do you push them away first before you get hurt? And it's learning, I guess it's learning how to navigate that process. I mean, navigating relationships, whether it's friendships or work colleagues or partners, is hard work at the best of times. It's not the easiest. But then you have that added element. And I think this is where your work and what you're doing can be so important for you, as well as other people, just to find a way. And I'm not necessarily talking about trans, but just other people, because when we don't know our own emotions, how can we build valued relationships?
And I think so. Every week on a Thursday at 5:30, I do a half-hour live event on Insight Timer called Thursday with Thor. And every week we take one emotion or one feeling, and we talk about it. So like last week we were talking about resentment, or we talk about envy, and what's the difference between envy and jealousy, or really. So we talk about, in one we talked about resignation, and another one acceptance, and another one surrender. We kind of really take, it's like opening up a dictionary. We kind of take a feeling and then we talk about it, and then they finishes off with that. And it's quite an interactive community now. I started calling them the helpful community, because it's like every week there's like sort of a group that always shows up, which is lovely. So we're having some really powerful conversations where we take one thing, one feeling, and really people kind of go, okay, and well, how do I know? Like if I talk about last week, resentful. How do I know I'm resentful? How does it show up in my body? What do I do when I feel resentful? Is it helpful? So, favorite question. What am I making it mean? Second favorite question. Do I want to do something about it? Why bother changing it? And I think that for me, Mike, first of all, I'm just curious about so many different things. And so that's my sort of curiosity, and really nourishes me, as well as then being able to be a hold and create that space for others to bring in that curiosity, and also to bring in some pointers. Have you thought about resentment, this or that? So because when we don't know what we don't know, we haven't got a clue where to start looking. So having someone where you can go in and kind of talk about one feeling, and then you kind of, like some people, because I think I've been doing this, I think we've like 150 or 70 or whatever events, and there are people who are becoming pretty much, most weeks, are building up their vocabulary, are building up their ability to read and respond to that feeling. And of course, when we know how to read it in ourselves, we are much more likely to be able to read it in other people, which then comes into, so like I still do a certain level of vigilance. Is it safe for me to come out here? But also, that could apply to other people coming through different situations. Is this person likely to be, an ally or a friend or a foe? Am I somebody who shares everything that I know with somebody and I don't even know if they're worth my trust? It's like, how do I, and without going into kind of protectionism and isolationism, and also avoiding kind of getting engulfed by the other person or the other person's needs to the point where we deny our own, that kind of, and I really see it as sailing. So I think I may have told Lenka, I love sailing. So every year I go sailing with my Buddhist friends. And what I love about it is that we're tacking and jibing with the winds and currents. We're always going over there, but that tacking and jabbing with the winds and currents really is the way I experience my day most of the time now, rather than feeling completely, capsized by what's going on. That kind of ability to go, okay, we'll just tack now, or do something different, or, I need to take a time off for self-care. And one of the things for me in my first aid kit is solitude. I know, particularly in a very binary world, sometimes I need to solitude where gender is completely irrelevant because there's nobody else there apart from maybe the dogs, or, So I think knowing what works is so important to help us then do that tacking and jabbing, to do that, sails with the winds and currents. And I think that's where we have all got the possibility of learning kind of one thing. And then when we learn one thing, we can learn another thing and another thing. And I think that we don't need to learn it all now. I certainly, it's taken me a while to get to this point, but that kind of just one more thing, just one thing is enough for today.
I love that. And thank you so much for opening and sharing so openly and be so vulnerable, telling your journey, because I think it is a journey that is not still yet spoken about openly as much as it needs to be. Just normalize having these conversations, just welcome people as they are into these conversations. So thank you so much for it. But also, we love resources and we love learning. So you already mentioned the Insight Timer, and I definitely want to make sure that we talk a bit about the First Aid for Feelings manual. But aside from that, are there any other resources that people can start looking at, explore? Because if people are maybe like myself, we find learning by ourselves in books maybe easier to start with, or audiobooks or podcasts, before we then jump into something that's a bit more social, that's a bit more live, more interactive, like the Insight Timer. For some people could be a bit too much to start with, because we prefer in our own little bubble to have a book and read through. So could we have a discussion about some of the resources that you would recommend?
Absolutely. So so there is the Insight Timer, and there's part of that that's free, like all the meditations. There's the website. So the website will have, like, this podcast will be on the website. There will be a link to it on the website. So there will be podcasts, webinars, blogs. So the resources on the firstaidforfeelings.com website. There is the First Aid for Feelings manual, which is a book. So those are the resources kind of within the helpful domain. The other resources that I would recommend are the Enneagram. We haven't talked about the Enneagram at all, and I won't go into much detail about that, but the Enneagram is kind of like a map of personality or behavioral styles. So, and there's something called the Enneagram Made Easy. It's a book that's called like cartoons. So you can kind of look into that and kind of get a bit of a sense of that, to help both understand ourselves as well as others through that sort of way of looking. I would also say EFT is a great tool. EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques. It's also called tapping. And there's the Tapping Summit. There's a guy called Brad Yates, an American who does lots of reasonably short videos. There's also the EFT Center in London with Sue Beer and Emma Roberts. So that's in terms of having a tool to work with. It's a DIY. You can obviously, I'm an advanced practitioner, so I work with people using EFT. But what I love about EFT, it's got a DIY version so that anybody can do it anywhere. You don't need to pay any money. You can just learn it and do it yourself. So I would say those would be the Enneagram and the EFT would be sort of the external resources that I would recommend people to, in addition to sort of all the helpful stuff.
And luckily, we actually had people speaking specifically about Enneagram, and we had people on the podcast speaking about EFT before. So if anyone is interested in having a little bit of a look before they dive into the books and before they dive into learning, they want to have a little bit of an insight, that we will attach all those episodes to this one for them as well. But what is then in the First Aid for Feelings manual? How does this work? What will it do for me? What will I find in there?
So the First Aid for Feelings manual is 11 chapters. Each chapter is set up starts with a story, somebody who's using what you're learning in the chapter. Then it's got sort of the philosophy, like the knowledge transfer I've talked about. This is what this is how it works. And then there's a practice. This is like exercises, or when you apply what you're learning. And then at the end, there's this sort of longer version of that story that you read at the beginning. So you'll always learn what you're learning through the experience of somebody who's learned it, through telling their story. And so you will learn about your feeling style. You're learning about feeling profiles, how to profile your feelings and identify what feeling you're feeling. You will learn the ABC, the awareness, breath, body, and choice, and why it's so important to work with your breath. You will learn some breathing exercises, but also some of the science behind that. We'll also talk quite extensively about compassion and curiosity. They've got a chapter each. So I would say the kind of XY axis on everything that I do And the whole fundamental principles of all first aid is curiosity and compassion. And so I always say it's more helpful to be curious than critical, so I think that's really so we spent 2 chapters on that. There's a chapter on Sherlocking. So Sherlocking is like a method for getting curious. So so I'm always like, this is the idea, and then how do I do it? I'm a big fan of practical. So there's questions that take you through sort of almost like how to look deeply and kind of get underneath the surface of whatever feeling that you are experiencing or situation that you're struggling with. We talk about pattern spotting. And then also we talk about putting together a first aid kit. So that's the actual kit. Up here on the shelf, there's like a leather briefcase. So that's the demo case for the First Aid for Feelings workshop. So in that brief, so the advice is to have something that's outside of your head, like a briefcase or a shelf or something, where you start to gather resources that help you either remember the feelings, your feelings, like when I'm feeling like this, oh, I'm angry, or when I'm feeling like this, I'm anxious. So you really help, you write yourself messages and notes when you're feeling better for when you are struggling. So you may find in your first aid kit for feelings, like I encourage people like writing a letter to your inner child, or when you are what I call crocodiling, when you haven't got access to any parts of your brain, and there's more detail on that in the book, that remember anything resourceful, you're basically working from the most primal part of your brain, which is literally, by the way, like a crocodile. Then we need to have something outside of our head to remind us to get ourselves back to ourselves, to come back online. And also things like smells or scents. Like in my first aid kit, I've still got, since 1999, an old perfume bottle from my best friend back home in Iceland. So when I really miss her, I will just go and smell her perfume bottle. It still has the beautiful scent, even it's 25 years later now. So it'll be scents. There will also be like, there might be some snacks or foods. There might be some movies. There might be, physical, practical things or tools and tips that you have in one place that then remind you of, how to connect with even just twiddling your toes or taking a breath or two. And also what often people struggle with is that they can become aware of what's going on. They can even do the breath in the body, and then they get to choice and they can't remember what choice is helpful. So actually having your choices written down in your first aid kit means you just go to one place and like, when I'm feeling like this is the more helpful choice. So you're much less likely, or you're less likely to go, oh, I wish I'd said this, or I wish I hadn't done this, to create that bumper space between feeling and action, so that the action that you do take is much more deliberate, it's more mindful, it's more intentional. So I would say those are the kind of main parts from the manual that you learn. But I think primarily what it really is really to help you cultivate that curiosity about who you are. There's only one you. And like we often talk about, or I say all the time, the only person that's with you from the first breath to the last is you. Not your parents, not your spouses, not your children, loved ones, whatever. The only person every breath of every day is you. And so that relationship is fundamentally the most relationship of all. And so the First Aid for Feelings manual really is to invest in that relationship and improve that from wherever it is now to where it can be.
Wow, thank you. And I think if anyone has been listening and been thinking, oh, I'm curious to find out more, this has really been, interesting journey, where they can find you, where they can go to then be more curious with you.
So there's the First Aid for Feelings manual, which has got information in it. Obviously got all the stuff in it. So there's the firstaidforfeelings.com website. And from there, you can sign up for the newsletter. You can link up with us on social media. And on LinkedIn, I'm under my own name. So Thor A Rain. And I'm always delighted when people reach out and get in touch. So do reach out. If you are interested in doing some getting some health support or getting some work to support yourself to feel better, then I always start with 3 discovery calls of about 20 minutes each, so that we just start gently with 1 discovery call and then another. You can have up to 3 calls. And if at that point it feels relevant and helpful to move forward, you can. But otherwise, that may be enough for you in that moment. So I always welcome people getting in touch.
That's fantastic. And thank you so much for being here and sharing all this knowledge and wisdom, but also talking about your journey and opening up. And it's just been nice to, I've learned new things about you, and I've really connected a few more pieces about your journey together. And I've been just reminded of so many helpful things that I've learned from you over the years. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lenka.
And to our listeners, what have you got from today? What was the one thing that really sparked your interest or got you thinking? We would love to hear from you. Let us know in the comments wherever you find us on LinkedIn or Instagram. And if there's anything that you think we should have gotten deeper into, do you have any questions, then let us know. We either will find a different guest to explore a topic specifically, or we will potentially ask Thor to come back and go deeper on a topic. But that's it for today. Thank you so much and speak soon. Bye.
If you enjoyed listening to our conversation, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and don't forget to subscribe. We would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and write a short review.